Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Newton Chang, and I'm Director of Health and Performance here at Google. Today, we welcome Morra Aarons-Mele. Morra is a leading voice on mental health in the workplace and beyond. She is an author, podcast host, and leading speaker and consultant in the field, working with a variety of Fortune 500 companies, startups, and U.S. government agencies. She is the creator of the award-winning management and business podcast entitled The Anxious Achiever, where she speaks with a wide range of leaders and experts exploring the relationship between mental health and success. Just this March, she released her new book, The Anxious Achiever: Turn Your Biggest Fears into Your Leadership Superpowers, which Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson calls a game changer. Since the release, she's been traveling the country on a book tour that's been getting an amazing reception. And with that, welcome, Morra. We are very excited to have you here with us at Google today.
Hi, Newton. It's fun to be with you.
So now your bio goes much longer than this. And rather than doing a standard intro, what I want to do is I'm going to combine some of your bio points with my first question. So you are a successful entrepreneur. You're a former communications and marketing executive. You're an extremely prolific writer, and you've won multiple awards across all of those domains. So when we're talking about high achievers, you are an incredibly high achiever. But in your book, you said that in the last few years, my purpose has been to create a forum for successful professionals to talk about their mental health. Can you tell us about this journey to finding your purpose and pivoting your career, especially after all this success?
I know I'm a midlife career changer. I'm going to turn 47 this summer, which is both really exciting and frankly terrifying because I have 3 kids. This has been building for 20 plus years. I was first diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression, and overlying that all with what they now call bipolar 2. Back then it was called cyclothymia, when I was 19 years old. And so I've spent my entire adult life, my whole business life, managing, pretty serious mental health challenges at times. I don't know how to show up at work without that layer. It's, even if I'm having a great day or a great week or even a great month, I've got to manage my mental health seriously. And I spent so many years feeling like, I just don't know how to make this work. I can't fit. I tried a million different jobs. I worked on different continents, different cities, startups, politics, corporate, and then finally became an entrepreneur and really focused on creating a work life that allowed me to manage my mental health, do what I'm really good at because I have a different kind of brain, and do less of what I'm really, really bad at because I have a different kind of brain. And I just talked about it. I was blogging, I was writing, I hosted an early podcast, and people wanted to know. They really wanted to talk specifically about having an anxiety disorder or having anxiety. And I just started building a body of work and knowledge and contacts and turned that into the podcast, The Anxious Achiever, in 2019. Sold the business that I had owned for 11 years, 2 years ago exactly, and have now embarked on the new journey.
And you said something that jumped out to me there. You said, and I just talked about it. And I think a lot of us are kind of staring at the precipice of saying, do I want to talk about this? And you made that leap. Can you tell us, what did that feel like? What moved you to do that?
I never had any shame about it. I don't know why. I was raised in a very pro therapy environment, and really just had no shame about it. And then, once I left corporate and I was working for myself, people actually have told me over the years, don't talk about this. It's going to be a problem. Like, you don't want potential clients to know. And what if you actually do go back to corporate America one day? But the cat was out of the bag. And when I did talk about it, I just would see relief in people's eyes. And, I'm a privileged cisgender white woman. I can talk about this without a lot of loss. And so that's what I do.
And so there's the putting it out there externally, but then the other thing I heard from you is that at some point you decided to stop saying, there's something wrong with me. And you kind of instead said, this is who I am, and I'm going to understand that and run with it. And for many of us, that comes across as this radical level of self-acceptance. To someone like me included, where I'm struggling with that myself as I share about my own mental health. What helped you be able to do that, to not just share, but to accept yourself and say, this is who I am, and I'm going to say this is my superpower?
Nothing else worked. I mean, you know this
Mhm.
as an athlete, Newton. You can't change your body. You can't change what you were born with. You can tweak and you can experiment and you can come up with a formula that works. I sort of had this aha moment. I was at a client's event in Washington, D.C. I live in Boston. I have a phobia of snowstorms and blizzards. Long story, but I've had it for years. And I was at a very important client event, and there was a blizzard forecasted in Boston, and my little babies were at home. And I became so anxious. I immediately booked a flight home, left my client. This also happened to me when I was at the White House once. I had such a bad anxiety attack. I pulled up American Airlines. I was going to fly back home. I called my husband, and he, thank God, said, Morra, it's just your anxiety. And this was before I accepted myself. I just really would just try to power through sometimes, and it just wouldn't work. And I had to come to a place of like, my client feels like I just left, and that doesn't feel good for them. Maybe they need to know a little bit about me, and we need to create a relationship that allows me to be amazing for them, which I can be, but maybe not go staff the event in January. And so it was sometimes shaming and a lot of trial and error. But I think all of us, no matter where we're at in our career or who we work for, we do have some power to shape our work lives so that we can play to our strengths.
I'm going to hold on to that story as something to reference, to remember when anytime I'm feeling a lot of anxiety and I want to run away, I'm going to remember Maura almost ran away from the White House and
That's
she
true.
didn't. And I'm going to use that for strength. So thank you for sharing that. That's a gift. Can you talk a little bit about, in our previous conversations, we've talked about the voice, this relentless inner critic telling us that we're not good enough and that we're lazy. For me, you called it the power through voice,
Hmm.
and I very much feel that, and I was raised on that. What does that voice sound like for you? And what is the voice? I don't know if you try to replace it or you try to counter it, but how do you address that?
I mean, the first step is hearing it as the voice and not my voice. And that's taken years of therapy for me. And I think for a lot of us, right? Because the interesting thing, and you could call this your inner critic, you could call it automatic negative thoughts. But I think for those of us who are anxious achievers, meaning we are really ambitious and really driven and sometimes powered by anxiety, like America runs on Duncan, like I run on anxiety. um, we internalize very young a critical voice. Who knows where it comes from? I remember you saying, like, it wasn't my parents. I don't know where this critical voice came from, but we hear it. We get so used to hearing it that we just never stop trying because something in us that's very powerful is saying, you're not worthy. You're lazy. I hear you're lazy. You're not working hard enough. And we just keep being powered by that anxiety. And ultimately, it's going to take us down. It's as you know, it's exhausting. We get burnt out. We have really sometimes serious mental health challenges. And so the first step is understanding that this voice, this is not me. This is a critical voice. It's anxiety. And I'm going to look at it and I'm going to talk to it and I'm not going to always let it win.
Yeah, one of the things that has been a game changer for me has been developing a more consistent practice of mindfulness and being able to, I think, two things. One, observe the voice, and then two, keep reminding myself as I observe it that the voice is not me. Even though it seems to originate from in my head, the practice of mindfulness it's redirecting it for me to think about the voice. It just is, but it is not me.
Mhm.
And as I think back about you brought up my parents. So for context, Maura and I have I was on Maura's podcast, and I talked about I come from a traditional Asian American upbringing where expectations were very high, but my parents were really kind. They never berated me, but the berating voice is in my head. And I wonder if, now maybe this goes to the title of your book, where anxiety can be a superpower. You saw, or at least I saw, energy in that voice, and I knew I had to achieve. And so you see energy, so you harness it, and you say, "This is what I have available. So I'm gonna harness this like it's some sort of, um, energy source available to me, and use it to do what I'm supposed to do."
Yeah.
You, tell us a little bit more about how you think about anxiety as a superpower.
I think it's exactly what you just said, right? But there's a lot of work to do before you can get there. I don't think anxiety itself is a superpower. I think when you learn to understand it, manage it, and then, like you said, harness it, channel it, give it a job, you develop real superpowers. Anxiety is on a spectrum. And as you very well know, at the bottom end of the spectrum, anxiety is an illness. It is disabling to the things that we love, that we want to do, that we want to accomplish, right? It is feeling like, and this is me, a lot of times I can't leave my bedroom because the world is not safe. I'm so anxious, right? Or me and my phobia of blizzards. And so anxiety can be very, very, very hard. And if that is you, I really, really want you to get professional help, because the good news is anxiety is very common. It's the world's most common mental health disorder. A lot of us have it, and there are really great treatments. And, in the middle is a lot of us who either know we have anxiety, we manage it, we go to therapy, we take meds, it's a story we have, or we're feeling anxious in this very scary moment that we're in as a world. And it's sort of chronic, and it's dragging us down. And that's when we really, really, really need to sort of tune in, like you said, look at the anxiety and really unpack how we're reacting to it, and is this serving us or not? And then when you can do that, you can actually create good anxiety. And this is a term that neuroscientists are using. And, this is the anxiety that we all need. And like you said, is very motivating. And sometimes we feel that good anxiety right before we're about to give a talk, right? That's natural. We want to do well. We're nervous about the outcome. We're anxious. And sometimes we're powered by anxiety, and it's been ambient and chronic, and we're not sleeping well, and we can take it and we can give it a job, and it can power us through, but that takes practice.
Let's go further into that practice. So one of the other things I saw from your book that I just love, this quote is, learning to tap into my purpose helps me redirect my anxiety when it's being stupid. And so to me, what you had just said about putting your anxiety to work, it sounds like you need a few things. It's like, what is the really meaningful, purposeful work? And then two, how do you take that energy that is available to you and harness it and point it towards that?
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about, like, what does that look like for you? And then another question that this brings up that I think might speak to some of our audience, we have a lot of people who might be very high achievers, but earlier in their careers and searching for purpose. So they have so much energy, and they're trying to figure out, where can I laser focus this thing? And I feel like I haven't found that. So can you talk about, what does it look like for you? And then for those who are still searching for that target, what words of advice might you have for them?
Oh, that's such a good question. The visual that I use is, if you have a dog, or you've played with a dog, and you have a Kong, or you have a bone or a ball, and you're in the park and you throw it, and all of a sudden that dog has a purpose. It is going after, it's going to get that ball, right? That dog is like making a beeline. I know you're a cat person, but that's using your anxiety, giving it a job. And that's how I think of it. You know, I am really, really grateful that I do work that I love, that I do work that matches my internal value system. But I also have pretty basic values, like I need to work to pay the bills. I have children that I've brought into this world. I want to help support other women through my work. And when I'm really, really anxious, I want to write books. I want to talk about mental health so people can talk about it. When I'm really, really anxious, when I just can't get on that plane or it just feels too hard, I think of the dog and I think of the ball and I say, this is what you want, Maura. You did this by choice. You wrote this book. And I think about my anxiety as the dog chasing the ball and I give it a job. And so what that might look like is I might say, okay, I'm going to practice for my speech. I'm going to make a plan. I'm going to print out my calendar and write out everything and rehearse my meetings so that my anxiety has a job. I may just write something, take my anxiety out there because anxiety, when it's just free floating and stuck in us, does us no good. We all know the feeling of just having our brain in a spiral at 3 a.m., right? Can't stop overthinking. So worried. But if you can take the anxiety out and give it a job, you can actually put it to use. Now, if you're younger in your career and you're like, well, that's great, Maura, you can write books, you do all this stuff. Your purpose and your values don't have to be fancy. Sometimes it's really just getting through the day. Sometimes it's making it to the weekend so that you can go for a hike with your friends. Sometimes it's feeling good. Can we do something? Can we do an
Yes.
exercise?
Yes. Let's do it.
Okay. We're going to do a really simple calming exercise that's going to calm our anxiety and help us tap in to our values. Okay. And this is a self compassion exercise. And I think a lot of you out there are probably familiar with the science of self compassion. So I want you just to take a minute and close your eyes and maybe breathe and put your hand on your sternum. Feel it there. Be there for yourself. And I want you to think about something that you did today or yesterday that you did a good job. You did a good job on something. Maybe it was you texted your mom for her birthday or a friend, or you wrote a great memo, or you got outside and went for a walk, or you made a really good dinner, and you finally watched Succession, whatever. It does not have to be complicated, but just think of something and you're like, I did something and it felt good. And just feel that. Feel how it felt to do something that felt good. And try to stay in the present. Don't say, well, I could have done it better, or I need to do it again tomorrow. Just try to stay in the present and feel it. Okay, now you can open up your eyes.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I hope that was calming.
For me, I reflected on last night. I took my 1-year-old and 5-year-old to the mall food court for dinner, as well as I don't know what we were doing. We're basically some sort of free form running around the mall and then hanging out at the play area. And we got out of there with no major incidents, no meltdowns, no diaper explosions. It went pretty perfectly. And I left there and I didn't take a moment to say, good job, Dad. I just ran home thinking, okay, bedtime's coming, get home. So thank you. I got to travel back in time and pat myself on the back.
Totally. And actually, being present with your family, I know, is a huge value for you.
Yes. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Now, let's take this back to the workplace. And so I want to talk about this work where you've been putting mental health at the forefront. And one of the things that you said in our previous conversations that I loved was, I don't offer anything that a million other leadership books don't say. I just use the words the other books don't use. Now, let's go into that. Like, what are some of those trigger words, and when you put those on the table, how does that change the conversation just by naming those words that shall not be spoken?
I, my publisher really wouldn't like it that I said that, but oh well. Look, modern leadership literature and YouTube and all the podcasts we listen to is steeped in the language of self-awareness, of getting in touch with your triggers, of developing tools and breath work and mindfulness and trying to stop being such a shitty boss. It's full of all of that. My perspective is that it's also mostly lies. Because if we don't understand what is motivating the behavior that's getting us in trouble, that's preventing us from what we want to achieve, or that's really making us feel burnt out and mentally ill, we're always in a pattern. And so we need to name the words that show up for a lot of us. And those words are anxiety. Those words are panic. Those words are depression. Those words are PTSD and OCD and bipolar disorder, and also ADHD and neurodivergence and autism. And not everyone is affected by these words, but many of us are, and the people that we work with are, and everyone is anxious. Anxiety is part of life and it's part of leadership, and it's uncomfortable. But we have to be willing to get uncomfortable. And I make a lot of people uncomfortable, but I'm okay with that because I basically want work to feel better. I want bosses to stop micromanaging because they're anxious. I want people to stop being so controlling. I want people to stop working so hard out of anxiety. You know, so much of how our anxiety manifests at work is in our emails and in our Slacks and in our teams and in our meetings. And if we just get in touch with this stuff, we can feel better and be better.
I've recently, not really recently, but I haven't recently observed this, but I think I've recently been naming it more often. As we get into this conversation about mental health, it's more comfortable to point external to the systems, the processes, or if we want to make it a little more human, like, what are the team norms that we need to address in order to help our team, have a better culture or to be more effective. Where I see people kind of put up the force field is where the conversation gets really uncomfortable and people have to start questioning not just what they're doing, but going deeper and maybe how they're thinking and who are they being when they show up in a certain way at work. And I think the conversation that you and others are really pushing is, no, you kind of have to go there and think about that and be aware of that. And from there, a different type of positivity will emanate outward. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, it's not always positive. I just want to make one thing clear, though, which is super important and has been such a learning journey for me, given where I grew up and who I am in the world, which is, you know, mental health at work is intersectional. I tell people a lot, like, it's not in your head that work is making you anxious, because most work is bad for our mental health, and there is data to prove it because of everything we just talked about, because we're stretched too thin, we don't have resources, we don't have boundaries, people are jerks, but also because we work in patriarchal, biased, racist, unjust systems that make people who don't look a certain way feel like outsiders. make people anxious because they are being cued. I mean, we're pretty smart and our nervous systems are pretty smart that they're not really welcome. And so with workplace mental health, you can't make it only about the personal because so much of it is systemic and societal, and yet so much of it is personal. We bring our childhoods to work every day, but we also bring who we are in the world and what we're butting up against, so there's a lot of threads, and I think companies really need to understand this.
I love that. I think queuing on what you said at the end there, I've always struggled with the phrase "bring your whole self to work." Not because I don't believe in the philosophy, but because it implies you have an option to not bring your whole self to work. Like, I think your whole self to work comes with you, whether you want it to or not, but you get to decide what you hide and what you show. That feels more accurate to me, and it sounds aligned with what you're saying.
I think I have a lot in the book, like, you do bring your whole self to work, but sometimes that self is a jerk, I think that I think the magic is in being self-aware because it's hard to bring your whole self to work because, again, we don't work in utopia, right? And so we do have to modulate certain things about our whole selves to fit into cultures, to lead, to manage, all that good stuff. But it would be so nice if we had a little bit more choice and self-awareness over which pieces of ourselves and when. And I think that's what a lot of us in the field are working towards.
Well, let's get a little tactical on that. So, um, as I've shared about my own struggles with mental health, and people within the Google community and beyond have started to share their stories back with me, what I find is there's a few segments, there's struggle across the board, but there are a few segments of people who pop up especially often. So, for example, for individual contributors, I see a lot of struggle of caregivers, especially those with young children. And then also those maybe earlier or more junior in their career where they're unsure of, say, their political standing in an organization. And as you think about those individuals and how they might start, bringing their whole selves to work in the way that you just described, like what initial tips do you have for them so they can kind of start to explore in that direction?
I mean, I think if you're an individual contributor and you're feeling anxiety at work, really trying to identify when anxiety specifically shows up for you, and most importantly, how you're reacting is really valuable. And this is sort of therapy 101. Um, but getting in touch again, because a lot of us, we're just not in touch with our feelings. We've not been taught to be, mental health literacy in this country is not great. And we're achievers. We power through. I always think of doctors in residency. It's like, of course, I didn't sleep for 4 years. Of course, I was stressed out and miserable, but that's what I did. I was a resident. I just powered through. And so that's such a powerful message that most of us have. And I'm not saying don't work hard, and I'm not saying don't be ambitious. I'm saying learn what you're sensitive to, learn what's setting you off. Why do you have a migraine before that sales meeting on Thursday? Why is your boss, their mere name in your inbox, making you feel nauseous? Your body is trying to tell you something. And so, I think that just learning that is really instructive. And then you can get to the question of how am I reacting? Do I need help? And, is this serving me? I think, the caregiving thing, oh gosh, it's so powerful. You and I both know what that feels like. For many people, the anxiety of role transitions working from home is making them just so anxious. Going from, for me, mom to boss to on TV, sometimes in 1 hour, makes me really anxious. So if I know that, how can I create support system and take care of myself, right? So doing that work, and if you can go to therapy, this is so helpful. for individual contributors, I think is a great start.
And then let's talk a little bit. We'll do one more question, and then we're going to jump to audience Q&A. So the last question, now, if we zoom out a little and we talk about people leaders, oftentimes they're feeling all the anxiety you just described. And as I've talked with people leaders, I haven't found any, honestly, bad actors who just say, you know what, I don't believe in the mental health data. It's more like they're struggling to say, I see it. I see my team is struggling. I don't know how to show up differently. What advice do you have to them to just kind of like to start to maybe make steps in a more positive direction?
I'm with you. I think everybody wants to do right, and I think the one thing in the pandemic is that we now know we have no choice. We have to deal with this stuff. We have to talk about it. I think that managers are people too, struggling. And so, understanding how anxiety is showing up for managers, all that is really important. But the key is that you do want to build psychological safety. You want to build an environment of boundaried vulnerability. This is not my term, but I love it. It's Dr. Emily Anhalt's term. And boundaried vulnerability is when a leader can be vulnerable enough to invite connection and yet still inspire sort of the trust and the competence that like this person's in charge and it's going to be okay. Because when you're a leader, you can't let your anxiety spill everywhere. So many do, but that's not doing you or your team any favors. So a really tactical thing, which I will leave you with, is to model boundaried vulnerability by talking about sleep in your next team meeting. Everybody loves to talk about sleep. Sleep is really underlying so much about mental health, but we all sleep or don't. And so you could be in your staff meeting and you could just be like, oh man, just haven't been sleeping that well, and see what happens. Because the key is that you want to invite connections so that you can solve a problem together and everyone isn't off suffering in their own little lonely fortress, but also helping people understand that, yes, you're going to do your job and you're going to take care. Because the last thing I want to say is that managers aren't therapists. Talking about this stuff is hard and it takes skill, and most of us don't have those skills. So if you can make people feel safe enough and help them if they do come to you, pass them on, get them help, you're doing a great job.
That thinking about the sleep example, well, two things come up. I got my new Fitbit. My sleep score was actually excellent last night for the first time in weeks.
Well
So
done.
I'm going to pat myself on the back for that. Uh, a few other thoughts come to mind when you mentioned sleep, but you can't see what's going on around my camera, but there's like, there's clutter, there's the to-do list that I can never get on top of. If I just started listing out my low-hanging fruit struggles of, I have too many meetings, my to-do list, I can't keep it organized, I can't stay on top of it, I struggle with sleep, parenting is hard. I think they're pretty much the same struggles that, well, aside from the parenting is hard, that everyone on my team and maybe everyone in the organization has.
Yeah.
And so we can start the conversation there and build. And that's what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. Like we can talk about human stuff. Now, you don't have to be like me and be like, I have bipolar disorder and I tried this medication, it didn't work. I mean, like that's messy, and messy is crossing boundaries for most of us. It's not a great management tactic. But I have too many meetings. What is controversial about that statement?
Yeah, I think the controversy would be if someone raised their hand and said, "I don't have enough meetings." I've never heard anyone say that.
Totally.
With that, let's jump to our first audience question. Okay, so the first question is, have you had anxiety during a meeting or at work? How have you managed it more in the moment and around coworkers? And do you share your experiencing anxiety with coworkers?
Mm. Newton, do you want to take a crack at this one? And then I can go after? I think you might have some good insights.
Yes. So, yes, I have experienced anxiety at a meeting and at work, definitely around coworkers. In the moment, I think there's a few things. Like physically, what I can do is I'll talk about in the context of a meeting. I know anxiety might arise during a meeting because you don't know where it's going to go. So I prepare before a meeting. And my own process is I list out, hey, what are my goals and desired outcomes for this meeting? How am I going to achieve those? And what are the talking points that I think we want to discuss? So I have something solid that it's an anchor. I can hold back onto it. And I might have to adjust. The conversation might change, but at least I'm not completely unmoored. And so that's like a very external tactical thing. Now, physiological thing I can do, it's just simple slow breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. And if I can settle the physiology, then the mentality starts to follow. In terms of expressing anxiety with coworkers, sometimes I will. It usually just to I'm trying to think about when I do this. The times when I'll do it, I think are one when I've established that as a norm with that coworker before the meeting. Like I've never sprung it on someone during a meeting where we've never talked about anxiety. That feels a little too volatile to me. Like I don't know where that would go. But if I've talked to them about that and set that norm, then I can tell them like, okay, like I'm getting kind of anxious. Can you give me a moment? Let me get my thoughts together. And usually they chuckle because if we've talked about anxiety, they also have anxiety. So they're probably experiencing anxiety too. And now you're not alone. So it's actually kind of a fun bonding moment.
I love that. I think I'm just going to add two pieces. One is individual and one is team. One of the best techniques I ever learned is from Moshe Cohen, who's a negotiation expert. He calls it slowing down time. And, getting anxious in a negotiation is super common, right? Because it's a very stressful situation. And so the tactic is you need to slow down time so that you can gather your physiology together, as Newton said. And the key is to get the other person talking. I do this all the time when I'm interviewing people. You could mirror back what you've heard them what you've heard them say, which is actually a great tactic for building connection. So Newton, I'm hearing you say that you expect the milestones for this project to be accomplished by January 31st, and you'd like to see it laid out. I'm sorry, I'm totally making this up. Okay, I'm saying that, but I'm not really listening. I'm breathing, I'm collecting myself. And then while Newton is explaining to me, I'm collecting myself. It's a super, super easy tactic that also uses paired listening, which is such a great way to connect and make people feel good and heard. And then on the team level, sometimes establishing anxiety as a norm on a project can be super helpful. If you're a manager, we got this huge project. They want it done in 30 days. This is a lot, y'all. This is a lot. Like I'm feeling, like I just want to put it out there. Now, listen, we're going to come together and we're going to make a plan. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that this is stressful and that we might feel a little anxious about it.
So two things pop out for me. The first thing that you said about slowing down time and maybe doing that by reflecting back to someone, like if they said something, synthesizing, reflecting it back to them. I actually do that prolifically, and I had told myself my story was that I was doing it to make sure everyone in the room is on the same page. I'm definitely doing that as a coping mechanism, but I hadn't realized that.
It's a healthy one, though. It's great.
It is. And I also get the feedback that it does help the room. The second one was a story came up from another friend of mine at a different organization where they were talking and they were going around the room and sharing, what they were anxious about and what they might even be afraid of. And it got to this one individual and they said, I've never been afraid in my career. And I think they're I can't read their mind, but to them it was this show of strength. At least that's what it came across as externally. What happened was it repelled everyone. It made them completely unrelatable, and it didn't make people want to follow them because they're like, oh, you are strong. It made them think, I don't want to work with you because if I struggle, you're not going to understand me.
No. No, you're not human.
Okay,
You
well,
don't get it.
with that, let's jump to one last audience question. I think we got time for one more. Do you have any suggestions for how to break out of anxiety paralysis for a new / challenging / overwhelming task? As a new manager, I find this happening a lot for new big decisions.
That's a great question. First of all, I want to acknowledge that's completely natural. You said you're a new manager. These decisions are big. You care. The stakes are high. So anxiety is actually a really appropriate response. If it's appropriate. But you don't want to let it stop you. And this is where, again, sort of acknowledging I'm anxious about this. I care about this. There's a lot riding on this is helpful. And then give the anxiety a job. Externalize it and work with it to make the plan. Getting started is so hard when you're anxious. And so I think it's really, really important to break things down into bite-sized chunks. Maybe even bringing some people with you to make a plan that you're sharing so that you don't feel alone and the sole responsibility. And then executing. There's a saying in anxiety land, when you're anxious, just do something. And that's really, really instructive. So I like to break things into bite-sized chunks, and then I like to check things off my list and give my anxiety a job. You can also use timer methods. It doesn't matter what method, but I think you need to sort of give the anxiety the structure while also acknowledging, hey, this is a really normal time for me to feel anxious, but I'm not going to let it win here.
I remember in a workshop earlier in my career, a Google director, someone asked a very similar question of this Google director and said, like, how do you make hard, kind of scary decisions? And his response was, making the decision and having the hard conversations around it, it never gets any easier, but your timing gets way better. And I didn't totally understand it at the time until I got faced with a bunch of those. And what I found out is way more often, bigger problems arise from being slow on the decision versus taking some chances and making the decision sooner. So over time, I collected enough stories of saying, okay, there is a big cost to waiting. And so now when we are faced with a decision, I think we try to think about, when does this decision need to be made and what's the cost of delay?
Yeah.
And if we can also be looking at that, then the motivation to try something and maybe to do something that might feel risky, you can push through that. And not to say like just push through your anxiety, but I think you need to have like a fair calculation on both sides of cost of making a decision versus cost of not making a decision.
I want to bring up something real quick that you just said. Sometimes when we're anxious achievers, we might be a little perfectionistic, and decisions always feel big to us, and the stakes always feel really high. And we have a lot of emotional investment in every decision, which can make us really feel like we're going to procrastinate and avoid. And so practicing actually right sizing the decision and choosing when you're going to put a ton of your emotional investment in something. And to your point, whether it's just better to like make the decision and then figure it out is it's a skill. It's a skill. And it's a skill, again, that you're going to have to build in your career, because those of us who try really hard, we can't try really, really hard on everything. It's just not possible.
And with that, we are at time. So Maura, thank you so much for your time today. I just want to remind the audience again, check out the Anxious Achiever podcast. Check out Maura's new book, The Anxious Achiever, Turn Your Biggest Fears into Your Leadership Superpower. I honestly believe it is a game changer. It both tells a lot of her story. There are so many pragmatic tips in there. We touched on a few. Please take a look at that. So Maura, great to spend some time with you today. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Newton.
Take care.